A naive understanding of perception is the notion that we copy the world one-to-one into our heads. According to this understanding, we could therefore recreate the world in our heads exactly as we observe it in our surroundings. After this video, you will see the world differently than before. I would like to turn our perception on its head. To do this, we will learn about 5 aspects of our perception. First, we should recognize that perception never stands alone. The context, the surroundings, what was there before always influence what we see now. What is true for our perception is also used in horror films. Such films are more likely to begin with dark clouds than with sunshine and laughing people. The fact that perception always takes place in context and that this context strongly influences our perception can be explained to you in our course of the module Perception by Alfred Hitchcock using the so-called Kuleshov effect. On YouTube, you might want to check the appendix for the link. When we look at pictures or observe what is happening around us, we tend to construct a story. Here we try to relate the black triangles, the circle and the lines to each other. We are always trying to make sense of what we see. This happens out of a need to understand the world around us. The German psychologists Haider and Simmel explained this aspect of perception as a construction of meaning. If we now sit together with friends and talk about the picture, we may come to the common interpretation that it is a confrontation of the 2 black triangles. Even if this is not only visible in this picture, if we agree with others on it, we create a kind of a social truth. So perception is perhaps also a kind of a social agreement. We see something one way because others see it this way too. In any case, we construct our own reality ourselves, which is also clearly evident in the 3rd example. May I ask you what you see here? In face-to-face seminars and lectures, many people say they see circles, squares, rectangle, or even diagonal lines. One participant once said in the spring that this could be a garden fence. A student once said he saw crosshairs. Crosshairs are needed in the telescopic sight of a rifle, right? To aim on something. The student, when asked, revealed that he is a professional computer gamer and that he regularly attends computer competitions for ego shooter games. So, is all of this in our picture? Shaking off the head, none of it is. Actually in this picture. None of it is in this picture. The only thing we can see and say here, objectively speaking, is there are lines. This is the only valid visual information in this picture. Everything else is not in this picture. Everything else that we may see is being interpreted by our mind. What can we learn from this about our perception? We supplement what we see, hear and feel with what we already have on our mind, with the experiences, information or even just assumptions that we carry with us. At first glance, this text may seem like an unreadable jumble of letters. But once we start reading, we'll quickly be surprised at how comprehensible it actually is. Take a few seconds to read this text. Even if the text now sounds correct, we haven't really read it correctly, not letter by letter. This little example can perhaps underline what we have just seen. Perception is a kind of completion. I've compiled several video self-experiments that will show you how selectively our perception works. Please find these videos in your online course or in the YouTube appendix. In this picture, you probably see a couple. The man is hugging the woman from behind. Small children at the age of around 2 see fish here, or more precisely, dolphins. Maybe you should press pause now and give yourself some time to discover the 9 dolphins in this picture. This is called selective attention. You can imagine that at the time my wife was pregnant with our first child, I saw pregnant women almost everywhere. Selective attention. And I would also like to point out a special case of selective perception, selective attention, the so-called confirmation bias. If we turn on the news expecting to see bad things, that is exactly what we will see. We humans tend to look for confirmation on what we already believe. I was a little disillusioned about the capacity of our perception when I learned about the last of the 5 aspects of our perception. We are particularly good at recognizing what we already know. This can be seen in the video Optical Illusion with an Einstein Mask. For our intercultural encounters, this naturally means that we have to be particularly attentive and mindful in order to better perceive unfamiliar communicative behavior and perhaps also to be able to hear what is not said, to read between the lines. It makes sense to quote the German comedian Karl Valentin here, "Don't believe everything you think." Let me summarize. Perception happens in context. Perception is a construction of meaning. Perception can be a social agreement. Perception is completion, and perception is selective. And perception is the recognition of what we know already. How can we now make our perception more precise? How do we perceive things more precisely in an intercultural situation? One way to do this is the so-called DIE formula. While in everyday life we tend to recognize and classify things very quickly, in intercultural situations we should slow down the following steps. D stands for description. What do I actually see? I stands for interpretation. How do I interpret what I see, or what do I make of what I see? The E stands for evaluation. What effect does this have on me emotionally? How do I find it? So D-I-E, description, interpretation and evaluation. Interpretation in particular is often a source of errors in intercultural encounters. Take, for example, this advert for powdered milk as baby food, which was very successful in Europe but flopped in the Near or in the Middle East, Eastern countries. For us, the message is very clear. The baby is hungry, the baby gets powdered milk, and the baby is happy afterwards, right? We read and write with Latin letters, and this implies that we read and write from left to right. If we were to read Arabic, Urdu, which is spoken in Pakistan, or Hebrew, where reading takes place from right to left, the message would be different. The baby is happy, gets powdered milk, and becomes unhappy as a result. We perceive the world through our culture. That is why we speak of the so-called cultural lens, through which we see the world. That is why we do not see the world as the world is, but we see the world as we are. Our cultural lenses are also clearly visible in this cartoon when we look at the three pictures that the rhinoceros has painted and that he seems to be very happy with. The rhinoceros's perspective is clearly visible in each picture in it. Unfortunately, we humans lack a horn like this that would remind us of our cultural lens. Related topics to the topic of perception are the attribution theory and stereotypes, and links to these videos or online course modules can be found in the appendix or on your online learning platform. All other videos and video exercises are linked on YouTube below and can be found on Moodle or Elias, our online learning platforms. On YouTube, I encourage you to leave your remarks and comments and to like and to subscribe. Thank you for your valued cooperation and feedback on the seminar and on the online learning platforms.